Okay, so good afternoon. I am Anto Budiarto. This is Monday Live. This is something that we do every Monday afternoon. Everybody knows who we are all listed on Monday Live. And the most important thing here is to remind everybody that views expressed are personal, not of any company or organization. We all know how to use Zoom tools by now, and this slide deck is on mondaylive.org if you need it. So this month's theme is delivering smarter buildings. We had conversations about industry dynamics last week, and this week's agenda, our normal sort of news and trends, chit chat about that, and then we're going to be talking about analytics, how we can be thinking about driving adoption of analytics. So we have our experts, Anno and Jim. John, unfortunately, is not able to be with us this week due to a conflict, but he has provided some input that will be. So let's move on to our sort of news and stuff going on. Ken?
Thanks, Anto. Okay, we're in our July issue, Navigating the Mixed New. That's been going fairly well. And we've got our head around, we've adopted your July theme of delivering smarter buildings, and we're going to use that as our August theme. And so if anyone has any information they would like to share in an article or an interview, we would love to have it. The case, this seminar just went on just a few days before. There's so much stuff going on that I don't know how anybody else is having trouble, but I'm having trouble keeping up with everything, or almost even anything. But it was interesting. I provided the link there, but it's proving the business case for building analytics, and it was basically around Berkeley, some of the stuff they've been doing there. So you can click through and see what that might be about. Mamori has also has this, how far are we really from in AI-enabled smart buildings? And I think the one comment out of it, there's little doubt that AI makes smart buildings smarter. The real question is when will it begin, and when will we be able to see AI-enabled systems proliferating buildings across the world? So interesting talk there. As always, my LinkedIn shares and Twitter shares are basically a reaction to me trying to understand all of the stuff that's going on. If you think I post a lot of stuff, you should see how much I throw away. There's just a blizzard of information falling on automated buildings, and I guess all of you. And so what I've done is I've tried to pick things that I think are of interest and post them on my LinkedIn and Twitter. So it kind of reads as a list of just stuff that caught my attention. And something that caught my attention just moments after I made this slide was this building controls webinar talking about security. And it involves some people that are actually even on this call. Or in the audience anyway, and it looks like a good seminar. Take a look at it. It's going on Wednesday, July 21st. I know Brian Turner's there. I saw that the lady from Google is there as well, and some other folks that we've been chatting around. So it should be an interesting webinar. Thanks.
Great. So you mentioned that things are getting busy. Anno and I were just chatting before we got live about that. I think there's definitely a sort of a build-up of activity and anticipation. Anybody else see that kind of trend going on?
I'd like to add to that. I didn't highlight that, but we have an article in our July issue from Skip, and he's always kind of watching the labor market. And one of the points in there that caught my interest was he's talking about there's some 26,000 jobs looking for control folks right now. And one of the things that caught my attention is, what are you going to do not to lose 10 to 20% of your people. I thought that was an interesting twist. Not only are we trying to build our workforces, everybody is at danger of losing a portion of their workforce.
Anybody else want to chime in on that topic before we move on?
I would
Actually,
concur.
sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I would concur that the market really is showing really a lot of positivity and signs. I know, that I'm seeing a lot of new opportunities that have surfaced now in all sectors too, including retail, including the corporate side, including obviously, as we've talked previously on episodes, the education market, both the universities and K through 12. But I think I think it's been a combination of pent-up demand, obviously, overcoming some of the challenges or that the pandemic has provided all of us. And but I haven't seen it this active and robust, I'm going to say, in about 2.5 years. So it's awesome.
And for my plug, we're actively looking for software developers, multiple. So anybody out there, just give me a holler.
Yeah, I'd second that. In we're seeing most of the places here in Europe that everybody seems to be recruiting and being busy as hell. There's not enough time to actually absorb everything that's going on at the same time as they've all got their heads down doing stuff and perhaps not always looking up to see all the other stuff that's going on at the same time. But everybody seems to be recruiting.
Great. So let us move on. Mark.
So I've got two for us today. So one is this, which really surprised me: the 10 unexpected cities where tech workers are truly flocking. I think it plays well from the previous conversation we were just having. But if you look at this list, Nashville, Tennessee doesn't surprise me there because that's kind of one of these new up and coming areas in all sorts of places. Nashville's on fire. But really, for Mr. Sinclair, Calgary, Alberta, who would ever thought, or Edmonton, Alberta? I mean, no one, that kind of caught me by surprise there. But all these cities really aren't I don't want to say the primary ones, but you don't see Dallas, you don't see Boston, you don't see Chicago, you don't see Austin, some of the typical cities. So that one kind of, I thought was extremely interesting. And then the next one is the latest and the greatest from our friends at JLL with respect to return to work and things like that. Like everything, things change. But what kind of caught me on this one, and I definitely encourage everybody to take a look at it, there's some really good nuggets in here, that roughly in Austin, Dallas, and Houston, about 50% of the office workers are back at their desk. However, in New York, only roughly 22% of people are back, while San Francisco is just around 19%. So again, I think there's still a lot of, working at home and so forth and so on. And I won't go into the details, but there's a few other things in here about the return to work, especially for women and what their reasonings are for wanting to return to work and so forth and so on. So when you have a moment, take a look at it.
Mark, are these numbers full-time back in the office or just people going back to the office in a hybrid mode?
Hybrid mode. Hybrid mode. And everybody are looking, what we've said on previous episodes, 3 days a week.
Yep. Okay.
And I think, quite honestly, that 3 days a week in general, with the exception of Asia Pacific, and maybe Anna, a little bit more about what's going on there, is probably the world norm, the world standard right now.
Yep.
Actually, Mark, I found this incredibly interesting. And of course, I was born and raised in Edmonton, Alberta, and we still have Jane's family farm there. So we always had a plan, we can always move back there. But I think what's happening there is the carbon crunch. They basically are definitely experiencing problems getting rid of their carbon. And what they do have is they've got low cost housing. They actually have a big pool of high-tech people who have come out of the oil field, kind of not wondering now what they're going to be doing, and or even in the coal industry, which have kind of driven the province forever. And so it's kind of a nice change. I think we kind of wonder how decarbonization will occur. I think this is a big part of it, is basically using some of those technology people that working on some pretty sophisticated stuff. They won't have much trouble learning building automation.
Okay, so moving on, Anno.
Yeah, interesting article out of GreenBiz. If you guys follow GreenBiz, Joel, he did a bunch of work on talent for ESG markets, and it's just apparently going off the radar. Couple interesting statements there. Just the number at PwC, looking at hiring 100,000 new net jobs in ESG, and that's a whole spectrum of people, right? So that's kind of interesting. And also from S&P's Madison, so, looking for people who understand data, metrics, data, and do analysis and build products around analytics and data for sustainability. It really clean, good article by Joel. Have a read of it, just kind of see what the thing is. The other one he points out in the article is a slightly different interpretation of ESG from Americas versus UK. UK apparently is still kind of focused on the financial piece of it, whereas America's starting to focus more on broader aspect of ESG beyond the initial financial impact stuff. So cool article.
Great, very interesting. So Roger, over to you.
Yeah, this was from an article by Mamori, just actually saying the record funding in smart buildings, 5.1 billion, just in half. That's 10 billion in a year, which is more than we've ever seen before, invested in all sorts of companies. Obviously, as you look down the list there, workplace management, specialized verticals, and asset and maintenance management. But a lot of those companies down there are not names you see every day. A lot of startups, but there are some CMMS companies there and others, and a lot of space management. But I think again, some of that emphasis is on the kind of aftermarket again, not particularly the construction part. When you look, it's all about occupancy and that. So it's once the building is occupied, then they're turning their minds to these guys, sort of looking and utilizing the data. But really, what we'd like to see is some of that stuff put on the construction side, so it's built in at the beginning, not just people coming along saying, hey, you got the data, can I get hold of it to provide you with the information? But that's still a lot of money being invested in the sector. And I think it's going back to something we covered a few times, is what is the sector now? If it's edge to cloud, is it edge to cloud plus the services that go around it, the industry we're in now, not just the BAS bit? Because at the end of the day, they're all leaning on the connectivity and some of the data that the BAS side of the business is actually collecting, and that's some of the stuff they want to get access to. I mean, there's obviously other things where they're going on retrofitting and putting in space management. It could be CCTV, it could be just sensors and other things, but a lot of it is still dependent upon the BAS serving up data.
Yeah, it's in line with our topic of today, this week's topic. So great, thank you, Roger. So this is me, a couple of off-the-wall things, slightly different path. 1 billion chips a day. I've been wondering for quite a bit of time now, how many chips are actually being manufactured, and I came across this. This is a lot of chips a day. And that's obviously fueling a lot of the things we've been saying. So I thought that was quite interesting to track that over the next couple of years. The other thing is kind of really off the wall is this thing that is this product that's basically like a duct tape or like a tape that has basically barcode on it. And you can rip off a bit of it and you stick it somewhere and then you can scan it and it's guaranteed to be a unique ID, a unique number. And you can track things. So it's kind of like a hybrid digital twinning kind of mechanism. Is kind of the way I thought. I thought that was just sort of an interesting thing that came across.
It's interesting with
You know, it's interesting. Go ahead. It's interesting. The 1 billion chips a day ain't enough.
Yes.
Just plain and simple. That is not enough. And I mean, unfortunately, the chip and component situation continues. You know, the supply chain is still, you know, there for all industries, including ours. But when you think about it, you know, is 2 billion going to be enough? 3 billion? Who knows? But to your point, monitoring it, I think it'll definitely be interesting.
Yeah, I was going to say exactly the same thing, Mark. You know, automobile companies are struggling because they haven't got the chips for their cars. You know, so you're quite right. There's just not enough.
You know, I saw an aerial photograph of Ford trucks, pickup trucks, at the Kentucky Speedway. And they're all, I mean, every inch of that massive ground speedway is covered with manufactured trucks all ready to go, except there's no chips. They can't complete the process because they have no chips to put in them.
That's
put them to the dealers.
We're seeing the impact of that on pricing, right? Prices, auto prices for used and new cars are higher than ever. Imagine what's going to happen when supply catches up. All those cars that are in there now flood the market. We should see a drop in the price of vehicles here coming soon.
Maybe this is the end of just in time, which has been oversold for far too long anyways.
Okay, so let's get to the topic of the day, which is analytics. I'm going to stop my share. We sort of have a few questions that we're going to sort of ask Hanno and Jim. I'm going to start with where do you think analytics fit in a technology stack or in a stack related to smart buildings? If in the middle of all of the other sort of things that we have to think about, connectivity and everything else, how would you describe where it fits?
You want to start, Jim?
Sure, I'll start in. Thanks. So if we look at a technology stack, potentially with users at the top, the smart part of the building in the middle, and with buildings, the physical infrastructure at the bottom, I would say that analytics spans from the bottom of the smart sector all the way up to close to the top, because fundamentally value propositions are what drive analytics. And further in the discussion, I'd like to drag us into talking about where the value is and understanding of domain knowledge and actually having some kind of material effect on the customer's business, with the technology being less relevant. So, but since it involves so much technology, including connectivity, data storage, metadata, and basically understanding what the data means, reaching all the way up. But I think the most important part is that last mile of how the value gets translated to the end customer. I know.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think if you know, the traditional model that most people have in their mind, like Jim said, is, you know, the analytics kind of sits on top of the BMS, building management system. That's been a sort of a, you know, persistent model. And the challenge I've always had with that is just what Jim brought in as well. it doesn't really complete the layer of what value does it bring, bring to the people who are actually using it. What are the applications? What's the use cases? You know, analytics of itself is no good without someone actually, you know, doing something about it, by and large. From a stack perspective, you know, the thing that has changed a little, we're seeing a bit in the APAC market, is people are starting to introduce what's called the data normalization layer or the data equalization layer, which is starting to abstract the analytics piece from the, you know, from the data sources piece. In some ways, that's more from a physical, you know, or architectural perspective, not necessarily from a use case perspective, because you can see analytics way down, you know, at the edge as well. People are doing analytics down at the edge. We've been doing analytics in BAS at the edge for a long time, you know, type of deal. The only other perspective I've always had on analytics is it's traditionally seen as a, you know, taking data, producing, you know, some results from that's presented to some human or some operator or some interpretation. I think there's another perspective as well. There is value that the analytics provides that itself, in my mind, you know, should go back into the normalization layer or the database or the data lake or whatever you want to call it, for other machines to use as well. So a lot of times analytics are used for, you know, crunching results, you know, a simple thing, Sparks, right? But to actually take those and do something else with another machine, I think is another space that we tend to ignore.
Any thoughts or questions from the group?
So do you guys think that the conversation about analytics is part of the very beginning when you're talking to an owner operator about digital transformation or, you know, building integration automation?
I do, Mark, because ultimately what we're talking about is how are they going to get the value out of all of these technologies and services that we've been providing. So I think that starting at that point is actually not crazy.
I agree. And in fact, I think that the tone has changed a bit, Mark, from not analytics per se, but what I get out of it, right? And people are now having the discussion of the results analytics provides as being the opening discussion pieces. The fact that the analytics is a tool that produces that. And before, I think, you know, before 5 years ago, we focused a little bit too much on the tool as opposed to the results it was producing.
So,
and we got enamored with the tool.
Yeah, so let me ask a question about the actual output, you know, so who is utilizing the output? You know, we could have some great analytics doing, you know, finding these things, and as the BAS supervisor maybe is morphing out of the on-prem bit and going into the CAFAM IWMS type system, who's the guy who's going to actually, you know, utilize this stuff? You know, is that changing?
Yeah.
You know, there's not enough people, there's not enough data scientists in the industry yet. So I'd be interested to know where you see that going.
So I kind of talked to that a little bit in the barriers section too, Roger. You know, what's the barriers to adoption? From our perspective, we've always found that, you know, the biggest challenge as to who's using it is finding that right internal champion, right? Who's the internal champion? And we find the internal champion is a little bit different from different sectors, you know, whether you're doing different types of the verticals, whether it's retail or healthcare or, you know, colleges, we find the internal champion is different. And your biggest challenge really is finding that champion. He's surrounded by a lot of people who have no interest in getting the analytics in the first place, right? So the poor guy has got as many detractors as he has as being a champion for the solution. The spectrum of who that person is, we find changes, you know, again from sector to sector.
And so could you bring up that diagram for me for a minute so that I can expound upon it, maybe backfill into Rod.
Yeah,
Rod,
go ahead.
you humor me for a minute here. So
yeah,
when when I hear people talking about analytics, it means many things to me. And I think that that's one of the key things that we really need to start doing as an industry is defining what we mean. So what I put up here is a slide that talks about engineered systems versus commercial products. So you hear about people all the time saying, oh, we're going to do machine learning. We're going to do analytics of things, the Internet of Things. If you look in the right circle, we have a series of products: consumer electronics, home appliances, medical devices, machine tools, automotive instruments, etc. Those are products. It's very easy for a manufacturer to do analytics on a product because they built the product. They know where the sensors and actuators are. They know the physical models that underlie that product. So basically using machine learning algorithms or tools, it's a much easier, it's much more straightforward problem. On the left diagram, we have engineered systems. That's what we do, where unfortunately, we don't know what's out there. We have to go discover the thing that we're going to do analytics on first. And we go into it understanding that that thing has imperfect sensors and actuators, imperfectly placed, imperfect in number, imperfect in labeling, imperfect in metadata. So our discovery problem of what we're going to analyze becomes much more important. If I look at the intersection of those two sectors, I would see things like airplanes, cars, where it's an engineered system, where it's a complicated, larger system, but it's still a product. So we're at the difficult end of the spectrum. Now, when you look at who's going to use this or what it is, you have to decide, okay, well, what is the problem that I'm trying to decide? What is the vertical behavior here? And I think that's the key thing. Analytics tools are quite empty without the domain expertise to understand who are doing the rules or the machine learning. What is the intelligence that goes into understanding that physical model, understanding where the sensors and actuators are? Once I have those things understood, then I can look at value propositions. And I want to draw a really distinct definition between two types of value propositions. One is often garnered through what people call data mining. And I call those things needle in the haystack or golden nugget events. So by doing analytics, I can find something that's interesting, maybe something that's wrong once. This is excellent for product marketing. You know, I can find out that somebody wants to buy a car that has 2.2 kids and a white picket fence and lives in Peoria, Illinois. But once I find that out, I found it out once. And in our business, selling analytics, what tends to happen is the owner says, well, what have you done for me lately? I found X amount of dollars in energy savings. I found this mission critical safety problem. But really on our side of the spectrum in engineered systems in buildings, really, we're not making a broad discovery of how the systems work or how they fail. In fact, we already know that when we go in. What we're doing instead is building recurring machines to find out what changes, what goes wrong, and what breaks. So according to what those value propositions are and where you sit on these circles, I think that your customer can be a very different person. But what I want to say in closing is all of this stuff is strictly related to the domain expertise and the vertical. And what we've found over the past 22 years of doing this is that most customers don't understand this, haven't had the time to think it out, and really have been unable to use tools on their own. And that's why I think ultimately the delivery of these kinds of businesses will be service delivery models where there's a consulting approach to help owners solve problems with analytics data. I'll leave it there.
I think if I'm right, what you're looking at here, Jim, is the bit on the right. People are or things are automatically taking actions from the output of the AI. So whether it's self-steering, self-driving, whether it's machine tools that need modifying or replacing, you know, they're actually taking some action, and some of it is obviously consumer, so nobody's going to be looking to actually present them. Whereas on the left, which is kind of, as you said, where we're positioned, we're still just presenting information rather than taking action. Is that fair?
I think it is fair today, but I think as Anno said, there's really no reason that we can't take action as well.
Yeah.
You know, and this would come down to certain industries. So if we found a problem, for instance, a demand control ventilation problem, could we vary the systems? And the answer is absolutely. And companies have been in the market doing that for the past 15 years. The problem is that some verticals don't want that manipulation to happen. So for instance, a pharmaceutical company, every time any change is made, they have to do 10 dump trucks full of paperwork. It's actually a problem for them to allow things to be changed. Same can be said for healthcare. Any other regulatory environments, sometimes having those closed loop systems are viewed right now by customers as being more trouble than they're worth. But I could certainly see a time in the future where more of that automatic control and correction is taking place.
But you know, some of it just makes sense. You know, if you're talking about running, do you run a chiller right up to 90%, or do you bring a second one on and get better efficiencies and things? You know, all those things you would have thought could be, from the analytics and the history and the information, decisions could be made and automatically kick in rather than leave it to a standard routine.
You're absolutely right. But, you know, ask yourself a fundamental question. Isn't that what the control system for the chiller already does?
Yeah,
this is what always baffled me in my own enterprise thinking over the years, is that why do I need to buy another enterprise package to optimize how the chiller runs? Isn't that the value add of the chiller company?
I don't disagree with that, but I think they've got to have access to the number of people in the building, maybe and all the other factors that are going on that may have an influence on that decision, because they've got to actually make a decision. You know, is the temperature going up? What time of day it is? You know, what time? There's many other things that from analytics you could help make the decision.
I think, Roger, the way that we address that is that's what we call this sort of unmanaged expectations problem. Yep. In that, absolutely, as Jim says, it's doable and has been done, and control systems can do it, and having more information. And this is kind of what I talked to earlier about. Analytics does produce results that, by and large, we see as sort of graphs and charts that users use, but just as easily could be used by machines, as we said earlier. But I think the real answer to that question is that unmanaged expectations, and I think that's absolutely an area where Jim hit on. One of the gaps that we've got here is that consultant, right? We are the people who are using these applications. They can perceive this and they can get to that natural extension as well. But there's someone who has to really advise them to say, okay, we can get the data from the analytics that the chillers are really running, this performance, and we really should do this. Where and how that's executed, and to Jim's point, is a bit of a function of the customer, the application, the situation, the systems they've got in place, the cybersecurity that they've got in place or not have in place, how many people are involved in that process. And that needs to be more of a consultative approach. And oddly enough, we are finding that the owners are desperately wanting that. I mean, it's not that they don't want it and they can see the value, but there's a gap there that's not being filled.
Right.
Do others feel the same way about that, about this being really needing that sort of consultative service part?
Is it consultative service? On one hand, I go, yeah, I agree. But on the other hand, is it us, or in this case, the analytic guys, identifying beforehand what the analytics should be, what they're going to produce based on specific agreed upon outcomes? That the owner says, I want to do these 10 things from technology and analytics. And I want analytics to be able to tell me and then help craft to deliver those outcomes. And I personally don't think when we talk about analytics as a group, as an industry, we're talking in advance of identifying those individual specific outcomes with owners.
You're right. We are not.
We are not. Yeah. And in fact, to emphasize your point, Mark, part of the challenge is I think there's still a consultative part of that front end process as well. But what we see over and over is, you know, you do your demo, you do your references, you do your examples, and the customer likes what he sees. And then you say, okay, you know, what are the 10, to your point, what are the 10 things you want to see? The first response we always get is, what did you do for similar company XYZ in the past, right? What was your previous, tell me what your previous, you tell me what those 10 things are, because I don't really know. And there's an opportunity there, again, to fill that consultative gap.
And do you guys think part of that, and I agree with you, what you just said, is part of that because to Jim's, or one of y'all said earlier on in the conversation, Roger did, there's not enough data scientists out there who are familiar with the built environment and really know what types of outcomes we should be looking at as an owner.
So go ahead, Jim.
No, you go ahead, Anna. Go ahead, please.
I kind of come at it. So I call it that when we first engage and get with a customer on the analytics side, we find that they go through what I call the 5 stages of grief for analytics. And the first stage is denial, which says, how can my facility be really this bad? Because when we first turn it on, we find so much stuff, right? It's overwhelming. So the first one is denial. How can it really be this bad? The second stage is always anger. Who let this happen to my facility? I thought it was pristine. It should be perfect. You know, the third stage is usually bargaining. You know, let's not tell anybody this, right? Don't show this to anybody while we sort out what the hell's going on here. And then the fourth stage is depression. They go, there's so much wrong here. I don't even know where to start. I'm going to put this on ice until I think it through. And then finally, the last one is acceptance, when they go, okay, I get it. Now let's go back to, what are my top 10? How do I, through this mess of stuff that you've just given me, let's sit down and work out, you know, what are the top 10 things, Mark, that we really need to look at, right? That means something to me as this building owner, this operation, as this facility.
I would add one more. What do you mean I got this, that, and none? I never knew we had that in this building. What the hell are you talking about?
Oh, that's still in the denial phase.
Yeah, but still, you know.
So let me,
here.
yeah, I've got some fundamental questions to ask here. So is most of the analytics oriented around the HVAC and the refrigeration, if there is refrigeration, or are there opportunities in other areas, lights, physical security, or is it primarily, you know, the HVAC and refrigeration side?
The answer is it's all of the above. But if you were to go out to any garden variety building, all they have is HVAC data. And that is true even with the advent of ASHRAE 90.1 some time ago. Lighting systems are still rare. Fire alarm systems could be mined, but there usually isn't that much interest in security or fire alarm. But where we find tremendous interest and where a lot of the action is in industrial and process control crossover. So if you're looking at an industrial facility that has potentially processed gases, processed chilled water, processed steam, those kinds of things, deionized water stills, water for injection, everyone is very interested in doing those things because they're so poorly covered by the industrial control side. They're viewed as central plant issues. So I think that there's tons of headroom there. It's really a question of data sufficiency and what systems are out in buildings.
Okay. All right. So my second question has to do with it's when you have in an ideal situation, brand new facility, and it's being designed and built to a standard. What is the argument you make to the owner for putting in data analytics right from the start? what is the promise that it will do? Because it's not going to find problems in theory if everything was done to plan and spec, right? So let's assume that everything was, done appropriately. What's the value that analytics is going to provide that owner from the very beginning that they would want to make that investment?
One of our most important parts of the sale, Steve, you've just hit on. And the answer is that it's not perfect by definition.
Mhm.
Even if there's a commissioning agent on the construction of a building is sampling at most 10% of those systems. We're looking at all of it. And for probably about 18 years ago, we pioneered using new commissioning dollars to pay for the service while the building is brought up. Second thing is commissioning is a point study. If I build the building in August, how do I know how it's going to perform in December? Whereas if I build into my construction documents that the building has to be commissioned over a year of operation, I'm continuously collecting data and optimizing that building for winter, spring, summer, and fall, and chasing out all of those shoulder month and changeover periods that exist in the building as well. So that's been very powerful, and many customers use it in every new building for that reason. Hold the controls contractor and the controls manufacturer and the mechanical systems contractors feet to the fire while the building is under warranty. That's a value prop.
Okay, well, that makes a ton of sense. Now it's a year later, and you've helped, as you said, keep everybody's feet to the fire. Why keep it turned on after that?
Because a lot of studies, including Texas A&M and 20 years of experience of my data, suggest that there's 18 months before the building degenerates back down to its baseline after the commissioning is turned off.
And just to extend that, Steve, the metric that we use, machines run fine until people get involved, right?
Exactly.
So no matter how well someone is always messing with the system. They're always changing set points, they're always changing time schedules, they're changing programming and configuration. At times we call that the Friday night special code, where the engineer gets a call at Friday because something's broken or something needs to be fixed. He does a quick patch and the BAS system says he'll get fixed on Monday, never looks at it again. So they naturally degenerate.
So if we think back, I mean, Jim, you in particular have been in this particular line of business for quite some time, better than 10 years, right? More than a decade, close to
21 actually.
What's that?
21.
21 years. Okay. How is there any market statistics that says the market has grown by X% and now it's so many, millions of dollars a year?
I don't know how anyone would even conduct that study. Every time I read these market research studies, I'm in awe of where they can get the data.
Right.
What I can say is the number of competitors has grown enormously, and some of them managed to stay in business. So I think that speaks to the fact that the market is actually really growing fairly quickly as well.
Okay. Would you say, well, what I haven't heard is clear, these are the top three things that are true in all. I mean, what you just said about making sure that a new building gets commissioned properly over time through all the seasons, that to me is a very compelling story to tell. So and you said the market is growing, although it's hard to determine just how big it is. But I feel like maybe the industry is not suffering from a technology problem, meaning how to extract the data and how to analyze the data. I feel like it's more suffering from a marketing problem of building the use cases and the awareness to the buyers that they need this and it has significant value.
I think that you're absolutely right there. I'm sure Anno can expound upon this, but it's a procurement problem and it's a budget problem. So what did I just say about the commissioning budget? I use the real pot of money that exists for every building in the construction project when it's built to get paid. The real trick there is switching over to the operating budget after the commissioning is done. Can you make that leap to hyperspace or not? And once again, you're not talking to the same people, right? Once the building is built and handed over, It's now resides with the operations people. How do they ask for money to keep that going? And here lies the rub. There is no built-in mechanism. They're basically being crammed down with the leaky roof and, you know, any other capital operating costs of the building, which, as everyone knows, in commercial real estate, those are to be minimized.
Mhm.
And somebody could just easily say, well, I just got the building commissioned, it's brand new. What could possibly be wrong? Right?
I'll
Very
give you a
hard to
great,
get money.
I'll give you a great case study. In fact, two pieces on that, Steve. It's absolutely a procurement problem. We were literally asked a month ago by one of our biggest customers in APAC. They're going ahead to build some significant additions to their complex, and he asked me for, did I have or could I get a template specification of an integrated BMS FDD analytics solution? And I went to the marketplace and I asked everybody, you know, give me a blank template for this. It's quite surprising how little resources are there for someone building a new building to say, here's a template of what it is that I'm looking for. And to emphasize Jim's point about that first 18 months, another example, you know, I went to a casino in the Philippines just before the pandemic, brand new casino, just opened up, literally just opened up. And I walked into the facility guy, we're talking about analytics. And his problem was exactly what Jim says. I mean, this guy still had leaking tiles, equipment that wasn't working, slot machines that don't work. He has enough other problems with his facility that he's just opened up, that keeping an eye on that controls guy it was an impossible task for him to even decide whether, you know, that's working or not. And so we did the same approach, right? We'll use this to keep him honest and make sure he's doing his things while you're dealing with all the plumbing and the leaking tiles on the roof that's not working, and all the fundamental construction items that are still not quite right.
I think Brian Turner just brought up the case. You know, this it sounds a little bit like a broken record, but most of it is absolutely true. You know, this is not a technology issue. This is still a supply chain, commercial chain issue. You know, that we've got a traditional route where people actually go, you know, get their buildings done, and we've got the mechanical and the electrical contractors and the consultants and things. And somehow, you know, you would have hoped that what's going on at the moment will change that. But, you know, as Brian said, it could be 2009, could be 2008, could be any day. You know, we're still struggling with exactly what you two guys are saying as well, is this is people, it's not a technology issue at all. It's really now a matter of getting people to adopt it, and who are those people, which goes back to something we asked at the beginning. Has that changed? You know, and who should it be? Should it be the FM guys? They're the guys running the buildings.
You know, the thing that scares me about, I'm sorry, it's not even about money sometimes. You know, they say they can't get the money, but if we come in with matching money from utilities or other free money sources, the service is almost free, and we still have a hard time. It's because from a mentality standpoint, they don't know how to package it and ask for the money. And in the finance departments, there's no budget for it as well.
Yep.
I think, Roger, what I see is, we kind of touched on this earlier, you know, the consultants industry has, you know, run screaming from this space. You know, with building owners, people were dependent upon them to tell them the right control systems, the right control solutions, what's the right controls technologies. But there's very few independents that these guys can go to and say, tell me what I need, you know, from an analytics perspective, and help and guide me here.
Absolutely.
To the point that I think, Roger, you just mentioned it, and looking at Brian's comment, I agree, is that I think we all concur that it's not technology. We've got the technology, we have the smarts to be able to do it, but it all boils down to the business side of this. And unless we make a business case, to your earlier point, Jim Lee, about the value props and all that kind of good stuff, we could have this same discussion 5 years from now.
So one thing sort of concerning me is that we're obviously hoping that this industry would grow, and as part of that, grow the number of buildings that can benefit from analytics into the smaller buildings, etc. And if it's all consultative sale, isn't that going to be a problem? How do we scale this? How do we scale this and make it so that it's much easier to deploy? And also the other part of it is that if it's going to involve consultative sales, it means there are people that needs to be trained to do that, right? That goes to the very beginning of this call when we were talking about the shortage of people. All of that sounds like trouble to me, the combination of all those things.
My one hope on this, Anto, is that, you know, if this is going to change the supply chain, is that the people who actually own the buildings now are the real estate guys. You know, if you own a building, you sell it and lease it back, you know, so you can release the cash. So and I do believe that these guys are getting smarter. You know, they're demanding much more of their suppliers. You know, they do want to integrate BIM. They do want to do, you know, have a number of other things going on. And I'm hoping that demand from the real estate people and the JLLs and CBRE and the people at the upper echelon here of the stuff are going to start demanding it, and people are going to have to really deliver some of those things, which is why we're seeing the rise of the MSI. I'm not saying the MSI is the solution to everything, but that's a new role that's emerged literally over the past couple of years to actually help facilitate some of those things.
And the MSI, you're right, Roger. And the beauty about the MSI is he does see analytics as a tool in his quiver of stuff, right? I mean, to him, it's a tool for a whole bunch of. It's not a be all and end all, but it's one of the things that he uses to deliver his services.
But it's not just. Go ahead, Andrew.
I was going to say that one of the ways to scale is to productize a lot of this.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah.
Takes it to the right-hand bubble of that Jim showed earlier. That would require some rethinking about how we do a lot of these things.
You know, one of the things that occurs to me too, listening to all this, if you want to get beyond just analytics that analyze the performance of the system and gives you more value add, like comparative analysis to other buildings and so forth, you have to generate a certain amount of consistency between your installations, right? Whether it be building attributes or the way your system is configured or the products that you're using. But the more of that you can build into the system and the platform, the better your analytics are going to be, and likely the more useful the information is going to be to the owner or the end user. That's been our experience in the restaurant business, especially, or retail.
You're focused on making it easier, right? I mean,
well, it's easier, it's repeatable, and maybe more importantly, you introduce a new value stream there, right? Because it's one thing to say my chiller is not working right, but it's another thing to say my chiller works better than 60% of all the other chillers in buildings like mine, or 80%, you know, works better than 80% more efficient, or whatever it might be, or consumes less power than, you know, on a normalized basis or something. So
that's kind of an attribute of products on the right bubble, is you can actually compare very easily, where engineered systems, you can't do that.
Yep.
Okay. Greg asked a very specific question on using analytics to verify sequences of operation performance as designed.
I think it's a great use for analytics, and as ASHRAE standardizes standard sequences and as they can be enforced, I think it'll be an easier and easier task. Right now, it involves whoever's doing the analytics getting the sequence of operation as it was designed and as it's programmed in, and verifying that it's actually working properly. And one of my favorite things to rail against is returning the building to its design intent. It's a crazy idea. Buildings are completely evolutionary animals, and as time goes on, the use changes and the operation, many parameters change. So you really never want to commission something back to its design intent. You want to commission it to how it needs to be used today.
And how is that done? I haven't heard sort of analytics being used to analyze, for example, building information in combination with enterprise information like retail information and ERP systems. Is that the way to do that, or is that just?
I mean, I think that that one has to get the programmed, be able to discover those current sequences of operation. And then through this consulting process, one discovers how the building needs to be run today. And part of the business process is helping the customer optimize what those sequences should be today, keeping in mind life safety and other parameters.
Yeah, we have one customer who actually looks at it. He wants to go one step further because he's got clever engineers and site engineers. You have a guy in the building who runs the building and knows the building. He usually has a better idea on what the sequence of operation should be for his building. I mean, it's like your house. If you've been in your house for 20 years, you're going to know what settings and parameters and stuff needs to be because you've been there for a long. So he actually looks to try and garner the knowledge out of those guys and to get and replicate those sequences and check to see if those sequences are running, because that's to him is true experience.
Plus the use of the building can change a lot depending on, you know, the type of building it is. A commercial building with turnover, for instance, you know, occupancy is different. The types of businesses that are in there are different. Everything can change. Even how floors are configured, right? One company loves everyone to have their own private office. The other one is all open seating.
And remember how many times when they do a tenant change out, does the mechanical ever change, right? I mean,
No, that's one of the goals in a change out is to keep as much as humanly possible the same, right? Keep costs down.
Yeah.
So we have a couple of minutes left before the top of the hour. Anna and Jim, you want to sort of wrap up each minute each-ish?
Yeah, I keep coming back to the same point. I think the people that we interact with, they look for and want and need, someone to help them on what do I do? How do I do it? And once I see the results, what do I do about it? It's not a technology question. It's a people question.
And to add to that, I'm actually really encouraged because, besides the procurement barriers that we beat to death on this program, this time and many others, there was a problem with mentality where people just weren't ready to embrace these ideas or actually change their behavior. You find something's wrong in the building, you should go to fix it, right? Makes common sense. It's what should happen. However, that was not business practice. Things were typically buried. People had entire business models that were predicated on making more money the worse that it worked. And a lot of the service contract business model in this industry was predicated on things not working well. So what's changed and what's so interesting to Ken's point is we're having a generational change. And a lot of those people that were not open to new things are retiring or have retired. And there's a new generation in there that with fewer people and fewer resources even than before, maybe that makes them realize that there aren't very many other options. If you can't hire technical people that can manage these sophisticated systems and buildings, maybe you should outsource it to an analytics company that can help you with that. As that old guy that understands completely how the building retires out, now we can learn that and enshrine that digitally in that behavior and keep the building running well, even without those people around. So very optimistic. I think things are growing, and I'm 20 years too early to everything I try. So maybe we're at about the right time for this to take off. What do you guys think?
I mean, a lot of comes back before you're ready to roll forward, I think.
Yeah.
If people are throwing money at the industry, like we saw it earlier, in the slide there, then something's happening. You know, something is definitely happening. There's an undercurrent that says, you know, change is needed.
That's a really good point, Roger. I want to echo that too. And we see the same thing. There is a lot of money coming in investment and new startups, and you know, whether they've got it right or not doesn't really matter. It's the fact that people want to see change, right? And money drives change. So
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
Brian.
I guess my listening to all this, what I'm hearing is that the technology needs to be paired, at least initially, with consulting services to achieve the desired outcome. Do both you guys agree with that?
I do.
I do. Yep.
So Brian, last comment is people are lazy, machines are coming to save the world. So that's great. So let's wrap the show on that happy note. I think this has been very optimistic and positive show and discussion. Love it. We will be back next week. We're actually going to be talking about stacks again next week because this group has been working on something that we want to talk about with a broader group. So until then, we will put a video of this up by tomorrow morning-ish. And with that, I bid everybody goodbye. Thanks, Anna and Jim, and have a great week. Bye-bye, all.
Okay.
Thanks, guys.
Everybody.
Yeah.
Thanks.
There you go.
Bye.